Do you love animals?
Do you know about the tradition of using animal symbols for the divine?
What are these symbols?
I'm Tessa Bilecki,
And I'm David Denny.
and this is Fire and Light.
Conversations on life, love, and soul.
Welcome, everyone, to our latest podcast. Before we begin our conversation about animal symbols, we're pretty excited about it. Everybody loves animals, and they can be a huge part of our spiritual lives and part of our access to our relationship with the divine. But first, we just want to mention, Dave, we're celebrating a lot of anniversaries right now. We've had quite a year.
That's right. We've got a new website.
TessaBilecki.com launched a year ago.
And the redesigned sandandsky.org also launched.
We hope that you take a look at those websites, and we'll be mentioning some of the posts relating to today's podcast, which you can find on those websites. And also, this is our 12th podcast this year, Fire and Light. Kind of amazing when I think about it.
Yeah, we hit the deadline.
12 podcasts throughout this year. So thanks to all of you who have supported us, all of you who listen in. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate your feedback. So let us know what you think and tell us how you respond and what you would like to hear from us.
And as we look ahead to 2024, we have one exciting hurdle. Tessa will achieve her 80th birthday.
Yeah, it is almost impossible for me to imagine that I am turning 80. That just does not seem possible.
So what are your plans?
For this year, hitting my 80th birthday, boy, I think it's high time that I made my memoir top priority. I've been working on it for years, and I feel like it's dragging on a little too long here. So I'm going to hunker down in my urban hermitage and write more. As part of that, we're only going to do 10 podcasts next year instead of 12. We're going to begin a new rhythm, and we won't do anything in January and July, which will give us a little time off and more time for writing. So,
where are we now? We're about to enter a season that Christians call Advent.
Yes, Advent means coming, and it's the weeks of preparation before we celebrate the birth of Christ on Christmas. Not only the birth of Christ historically in Bethlehem, but in our hearts and in our world. Our world is a bit more of a mess this year.
Yes, of course, everybody's aware of the just the horrors of the war in Palestine and in Gaza. And since October 7th, news from there has been pretty bad. Thank goodness, more recently, there have been some hostage exchanges. So that gives us some glimmer of hope. But nevertheless, the death toll is devastating.
And because part of the work of our Desert Foundation is better understanding and reconciliation between Jews and Christians and Muslims, Dave has written several reflections about what's going on in that region of the world. And people tend to look to him because he digests news differently from most people. He knows how to ferret out the hopeful aspects of the most tragic circumstances. So if you look at the sandandsky.org website, Dave has several new posts up which may relieve yourself some of the anxiety you may be feeling and give you a better sense of hope, because there are even new groups, in addition to the traditional peacemaking groups that we're aware of in Israel, Palestine. There's some new efforts being made, and we should all be encouraged by this. So, Advent, preparing for Christmas, out in the world, kind of busy out there, very commercialized.
big stores in New York City are all decked with all kinds of ornate products to buy for Christmas.
And we do something different. What does our Advent look like?
Well, we try to simplify our lives, try to live more quietly during these weeks.
Yeah, and we empty our days. The more secular approach to this season before Christmas is to fill it up with parties and gatherings and shopping and all kinds of commotion. And we try to eliminate as much of that as possible and go quiet. A very good practice for this month is to meditate on the Advent wreath. If you don't know what that tradition is about, the meditation by candlelight on the 4 weeks of Advent with 3 purple and 1 rose-colored candle, you can look at tessabalecki.com and find out about making an Advent wreath if you don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. We always also would do special reading during this season. Do you have anything in mind?
This year for my Advent reading, I'm going to go deeper into the spirit of the desert, which is a spacious place, an empty place. I'm going to reread one of my favorite desert books by Belden Lane called The Solace of Fierce Landscapes.
Yes.
You know, we did an Advent Christmas book years ago called Season of Glad Songs. It's an anthology of readings that Dave and I put together. We poured all of our love for the Advent season, Christmas, the 40 days of Christmas, actually. It's because it goes until when, Dave?
It goes all the way until February 2nd, traditionally. Most people don't know that. So.
Yeah, so that's the Feast of Candlemas. So what we put into this book are rituals for the Advent wreath, for setting up your Christmas manger, rituals for the Feast of Epiphany, when the Magi arrive, the 3 wise men arrive, and there's some stuff in there about what the world would have been like if it had been 3 wise women instead of 3 wise men. So take a look at Season of Glad Songs. I think you'll be glad that you did.
And then I'm going to go back to a classic series of really children's books by C.S. Lewis called The Chronicles of Narnia. The first one is called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, that's a wonderful intro into our theme for today's podcast, which is animal guides or animal symbols for the divine, because in the Chronicles of Narnia,
the lion of The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, of course, for anybody who's read that, knows that it's a strong symbol for Christ.
Dave has done something quite remarkable. He has very imaginatively written a whole series of prayers in which he addresses the divine with various animal names like salmon, swallow, unicorn. It's his version of an old tradition which is known as the O antiphons, a very powerful tradition.
So for the final week before Christmas, back in the monasteries, there was a monk who wrote a special antiphon or a verse for each of those 7 days preceding Christmas.
From the 17th until the 23rd.
And each one focused on a different image of God from the Bible. So you have something like Lord or Adonai, morning star, wisdom, all these images. Some of them are more graphic. than others.
Graphic like key, root, flower, earth images. Because I think it's important to remember these as very universal and archetypal symbols. And if you want to know more about that, I've written about the tradition of the O antiphons again on tessabalecki.com. So you can look there and you will see something about the background of it. I call them primordial praise names. And I not only talk about, yes, these images from the Bible, I talk about musical comedy. I talk about the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert in South Africa. It's a very vibrant tradition. So check that out and you'll get the classical tradition. But then what's beautiful is what Dave did. So tell us about that.
Well, again, going back to our time in Nova Scotia, we lived in the wilderness and there are all kinds of animals around all the time. And they were just part of the community in a way. So that made me think about how many of the early Christian writers wrote these kind of quirky works called bestiaries, in which they thought about how different animals embodied different aspects of God or different aspects or dimensions of Jesus. And so then when I was thinking about the O antiphons, I started to think, well, those old monks used to write about animals in ways that were totally weird, like they'd never seen half of these animals, never would, had no idea what they were really like. But there were legends, there were stories from other cultures that might trickle in, and they had these crazy ideas about animals even that didn't even exist. So, for example, the unicorn, there were stories, there were legends. And these guys usually thought they were real. And so then they wrote little stories about these animals that taught lessons. So I thought about doing new antiphons.
And you also have written, again, on sandandsky.org, your post is called A Christian Bestiary. And you write about this whole tradition. I have to tell you, I love the way Dave begins this post. His first line is, "What does a kiss mean?" A kiss. So he's about to talk about a Christian bestiary, but he starts with the meaning of a kiss. I'm not going to, don't say anything about that. Just go and read that. It's pretty provocative. Yeah. He talks about the difference between a depth symbol, and a kiss is a depth symbol, a unicorn is a depth symbol, versus an efficiency symbol.
Right, like a stop sign. it doesn't have a lot of different deep meanings. It means just stop the car. Whereas something like a kiss or something like water can mean one thing when you're jumping into a swimming pool. It could mean something very different if you're thrown overboard and are drowning. It could mean something very different when you're being baptized, for example. So these rich symbols
are symbols.
Really important, I think, in our lives. And I think we've lost a lot of that in our very utilitarian commercial culture. So that's also what I was trying to do.
One of the things that's fascinating is that you really update this whole idea of the bestiary by making mention of Harry Potter. What happens in those incredible stories, which we both love so much, and how the Patronus is a depth symbol for each of those kids in the Harry Potter stories.
Yes, if you haven't read Harry Potter, this may be a little bit esoteric, but if you have, you'll remember that one of the most powerful spells that a young wizard could learn was to produce a Patronus. And the way you do that is you think about something that's so beautiful, so wonderful, the happiest memories of your life. Bring those all into your heart. And then when you do that, this Patronus, this protective presence appears which can protect you from just about anything. And
Yes.
very often it is the shape of an animal.
Yes, it is an animal. And we won't go through the list of whose Patronus is what animal in the stories, but it's a very powerful part. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about an animal as a guide, as
an advocate.
An inspiration. I mean, many of us have had animals in our lives, domesticated animals who have meant so much to us. I had a cat that lived until he was 22 years old and was a very profound inspiration in my life. Dave, you had such a profound relationship with our sheepdog in Nova Scotia who was called Zorba. What are some of the other animals in your animal antiphons?
Well, there's a lion and a unicorn. Those are especially important to me because a big formative book in my past was called The Mind and Heart of Love. And he talked about, the author, Darcy was his name, talked about the symbol of the lion and the unicorn. Lion representing a kind of self-regarding, noble, proud love. Also self-regard, self-respect, the love that's characterized, he felt, by this image of the lion. Whereas the unicorn, that's the other-centered love. That's the ecstatic love. That's the more like romantic kind of love, sacrificial, that a whole life needs to be a balance of those two aspects. So those were two key animals for me when I started to think about the O antiphons.
In the antiphon prayers that you created, and also as you described the bestiary, I think there's a lovely balance of masculine and feminine images. So, for example, there is the pelican, and most people don't know about this symbol for God, a very feminine symbol. The pelican is known for piercing her breast in order to feed her young. I think twice in my life, I have seen a pelican image in a church. It's very rare, but it's very ancient, and I think it's one of the most powerful.
Yeah, if you Google it, you'll find tons of images from churches all over the world.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Just Pelican Eucharist, you could type.
That's great.
That's an example of how there's no truth in that a pelican would pierce its own breast to feed its young. But these monks thought about an image and a legend that they had heard and put them together.
Yeah, so it captured their imagination and it taught them something about the femininity of God, which is important. I love how you describe the swallow and the image that you put on sandandsky.org of the swallow is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Because it's the swallow who is building her nest.
Mm-hmm.
And the swan, I love the in the ancient bestiaries, the image of the swan, the heartbroken swan, both masculine and feminine. Tell us something about the swan.
Yeah, it doesn't show up in the O antiphons, but it does show up in my article about
the bestiary.
The bestiary. And I quote an anecdote from a book called The Cowboy and the Cossack. And it describes how swans mate for life and the grief that a swan suffers when its mate dies. It's very touching.
Yeah, very, very touching. So you see the beauty of what we can learn both from real animals and birds and fish, and then the legends and the stories and the symbols that are associated with these animals. So I love what you say, but maybe bad science in the bestiary, but it's good theology.
Yeah, because there's lots of ways to read the universe. And I think sometimes we get so hung up on a scientific analysis of how things work that we forget that these rich depth symbols have their truths that can sometimes go deeper than mere fact or mere scientific verification. So we're talking about the mysteries of human suffering, of human longing, of love, loss, all of that. And those are real.
Yeah, very real. And you also, so there's something playful and a sense of celebration.
That's the other thing. I think sometimes religion has been presented as a system of fear. You must do this, you must not do that. You must think this, you must not think that. And it's very fearful and very limiting. Whereas somebody like, I think Flannery O'Connor, one time somebody asked her, well, gosh, well, how can you be an artist and be a Christian? Because you have to be so dogmatic about what's right and what's wrong and what's true and what's false. And she was sort of dumbfounded, and she said, "Are you crazy? This is the weirdest story in the world. This you couldn't make this up. This is so odd and bizarre." And I find that my faith makes me more creative than ever. And I kind of like that idea that faith should open us out, not just scare us into a corner, but open us out into the beauty, the wonder, the mystery. Also, I have to say, nobody probably understands this guy. I understood a little tiny bit of a guy named Hans Urs von Balthasar when I was in the monastery. But he had one thing that did sink in. He said that, our tradition seems to have focused on the good and the true, which means, we're very into, as Western religious type people, we're into goodness, meaning morality, and we're into truth, which is like dogma. And we ran into the problems of dogmatism and moralism, which everybody hates. So he said, why not think about the third big mystery, and that is beauty. The beauty of play, of animals, of creation, and the grace that comes through celebrating that.
And the beauty of the literature that comes out of meditating on these things, on these animal guides, the poetry, music, the art that comes out of all this. We have the famous unicorn tapestries. You've seen those.
Yes. Yeah, in New York, the cloisters.
Right.
And it's an amazing thing to be able to behold that. And that was even a more secular kind of mythology, but beautiful.
But it's about the legend of the legend of the unicorn. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I love the art. I mentioned already the swallow art that you chose on your web post for the animal O antiphons, but for the bestiary, you have a gorgeous picture of a tiger.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of amazing that we're talking about the season of Advent. We're talking about the coming of Christmas, the birth of Christ on Christmas. And we're talking about unicorns and lions and tigers. You don't do a bear, but you do an eagle. Mm-hmm. And the salmon. Talk a little bit about the salmon. Salmon is a very important image for you.
Yes. In the early church, the symbol of a fish was a big deal. It just happened to be that the Greek word for fish was ichthus, and those letters are the first letters of the words Jesus Christ, Son of God. So you still see that on people's cars, a little ichthus sign, fish sign. But the salmon in particular struck me when I read a poem by a guy named David Wagoner. And he was writing about some of the myths of the Native Americans of the Northwest. And the poem was called Salmon Boy. And it was all about the salmon swimming upstream, spawning, and then they die. The people fish them out of the stream. They stake them out to dry. And it reminded me so much of, Christ crucified, and made me think of the powerful image of the salmon as a Christ figure, feeding people, nourishing them, keeping them alive.
So how important this whole tradition is. So this suggests then a very colorful, vibrant Advent practice. What would you recommend, Dave, to our listeners?
Well, I would recommend that you consider coming up with your own O antiphons. Think about animals you've encountered, maybe in your own life, maybe in a book or a film. Think about what they taught you. How might they guide you? Reveal a new dimension of the divine, the sacred to you, or actually represent a kind of a patronus or a protector, an image. I know I remember I had an art teacher once who had polio as a kid and suffered a lot from the weakness of his legs, and he chose as his spirit animal, he was a part Navajo, he chose a bear to represent strength. So that a bear, if you know, bears can actually cover a lot of territory. So that became his animal that would protect and inspire him.
As you're working with this as a practice over these next weeks of Advent, well, the animals choose you in a very real way. They're not only symbols for the divine, but they are aspects of your own soul.
Yes, I think one of the things that gets downplayed in some Christian spirituality, at least, is that we really are created in the image of God. And so we've got that divine inside as well. So to think about how God is dwelling in you in these symbolic ways is quite powerful.
Yeah. So, how are you part salmon?
Mm-hmm.
How are you embodying the unicorn?
Yeah.
How does the eagle or the heartbroken swan live in your own soul?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a very rich meditation for this Advent. And for our meditation, we'd like to explore these animal antiphons with you. And to get us ready, Dave, set us up.
So let's find a comfortable position and take some deep breaths. And think about what animals you may have encountered, either in your imagination, in literature, or in reality in your own life. Think about one that may represent something especially sacred to you. And then we'll invite in some of my favorite animal friends.
Oh, swallow. Winter ends when you come carelessly capering from heaven and build your nest beneath our eaves. Come, bird from paradise, though you be small and powerless, you, swallow, are the invincible phoenix.
O mighty Ram, enthroned atop Mount Zion, guide us to your dwelling. By your strength we strive, and by your blood we conquer dragons. Come, O victim, victor, bridegroom Ram, thou who art the great I am.
O salmon, leap like lightning from the womb, burst above cascades of chaos, climb love's ladder, sow your blood and burning water at the ancient source of all our sorrow. Drowning, you destroy our death. Leaping, you lead us to life. O Ichthus, salmon, come in glory.
O divine eagle, come and hover over us, your brood, who pierced your pinions, the only ones that can bear us up from death and sin to sun and everlasting love.
O sovereign stag, to you our lovelorn cries arise like arrows. Love immortally wounded, save us. We are banished and barren. Climb down to free us and lead us home to headwaters, crags, and columbines.
O Lion of Judah, King of courage, come to crush our blighted bones and hardened hearts, and with one roar restore your stillborn whelps to everlasting life.
O unicorn, feral, fierce, brave-hearted Lord, yet tender, soft, surrendered lover, pierce and purify us. Come, fleet steed of starlight, prince of dreams, horn of plenty, ever ancient, ever fresh, milk white moonlight, word made flesh. Amen.
Amen.
You've been listening to Fire and Light, and if you like what you've heard, go deeper. Go deeper this Advent. Look at tessabalecki.com and
sandandsky.org
for a more profound look at what you've heard us talk about today. And if you like what you see, what you've heard,
push that donate button.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for Fire and Light.
Conversations on life, love, and soul.
The background music for Fire and Light is The Day We Met, composed and performed by Ricky Zhao.
Fire and Light's theme music is Dreamcatcher, composed and performed by Chris Martin and Jeff Harvey at Purple Planet Music.
Fire and Light is recorded in Tucson, Arizona, editing by David Levin.